Welcome to today's event. My name is Stephen Vogt. I am a senior product engineer here at Kanji. Prior to Kanji, I was at Apple for about 15 years in various roles in retail, professional services, and the enterprise space. A common question I used to hear from our customers is, how can I migrate from one device management solution to another? So I'm really excited to be moderating today because that is exactly what we're going to be talking about. We'll cover what migrations look like, we'll talk about the challenges they present, and we're going to share some tips on how to successfully migrate your fleet of Apple devices from one device management solution to another. With me, I have two panelists. Eric Van Dyke. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Awesome. Eric acts as the IT growth and technical support manager at Vidyard, a fully remote 300-plus employee SaaS organization. He's worked with the company since 2019, and through his 6-year career in IT, Eric has managed several MDM deployments in industries such as SaaS, managed services, and manufacturing. Jim Quilty, welcome.
Thanks, Stephen. Nice to be here.
Yeah, Jim has worked with and managed Apple products for the last 19 years, including many MDM migrations as an engineer for an Apple-focused managed service provider. Jim currently manages the solutions architecture team here at Kanji, who primarily provides technical knowledge and migration support to new clients. Welcome, guys. So I just want to start by setting the stage. Migrating from one device management solution to another can really be daunting, and you've both been through it. Maybe, Eric, let's start with you. Could you tell us just at a high level what the typical Mac migration process looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. So at a high level, I'm going to agree that migrations are pretty tricky. I've been through a few, and each time that we've done it, it's for me involved a planning and a testing stage. Then we have sort of the building documentation and building guide stage. A test rollout. I always like to do a test rollout with a small group of highly technical users to really make sure that we haven't missed anything, make sure our documentation's good, and gather feedback. And then the actual rollout itself, which is the main event, and then afterwards there's sort of a period of time where you're troubleshooting and fixing issues and troubleshooting things that you might not have expected, and so that usually takes a couple weeks afterwards as well.
Yeah, and is it a certain amount of time kind of per device? Is it just real quick, or what would somebody expect for overall time frame?
Yeah, so for an organization of our size, with the migrations that I've done in the past, the whole process usually takes I've found about a couple months or so, with the actual deployment process taking a couple of weeks. Sometimes that can go a lot longer if you're working to you have to keep asking folks to install the program and actually complete the migration. That can make the process take a little bit longer, but yeah, usually a good couple weeks for the full deployment.
Awesome. And Jim, I just want to kind of double click and look at a few of those technical details. Obviously, from doing a lot of those migrations, can you kind of dig into what is happening behind the scenes on a migration? What makes it complicated?
Yeah, absolutely. Mostly it's that there's a lot of things that have to happen in the right order in order for a successful migration to happen. There can't be more than one MDM on an Apple device at a time, so you've got to coordinate getting the old MDM off and then getting the new MDM on, making sure that there's as little time as possible in that gap where the device is out of management, and then making sure that what applications are going to be installed or potentially uninstalled during the migration. Are there new settings that are going to be applied? Are there old pieces that have to be removed beyond the MDM? So there's just a lot, like Eric said, there's a lot of planning that goes into the migration to make sure it happens successfully.
Yeah, and would you say, is there a difference between migration you see on Mac OS and that on an iOS or iPad OS?
Yeah, definitely. Depending on things, iOS is almost easier in a way, but that's simply because oftentimes the best way is just to wipe the device and start over, as long as that is viable in the situation. Because there's more complexities with Mac OS, but there's also more options. So there's more things that you can do. There's potentially more pieces. With iOS, it's fairly straightforward, and it's more of a coordination thing, I'd say.
Gotcha. So coordinating with your users, basically.
Exactly, coordinating with the end users.
Got it. And Eric, I just want to kind of maybe pull on one other thread. You know, there's a difference obviously between macOS and iOS, but is there also a difference between when you have maybe a manually enrolled device, meaning the user or the admin is taking that device, enrolled it, maybe using, the web or Safari or something like that, or one that's in Apple Business Manager and using automated device enrollment?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've always found that Apple, automated device enrollment and devices that have been added to ABM are always much easier to migrate or move to to a new MDM, especially new devices as well. Like if you're setting up a brand new device, if it's ABM enrolled, it's really, really simple to add that to your MDM. I will say, due to the pandemic situation, we actually had at Vidyard a fair number of devices that were ABM enrolled and a fair number that weren't because we had to buy them from, a retail store or something like that. So initially, I was a little bit worried about what that would mean for us, but the Kanji migration agent actually makes it really, really easy for ABM devices or non-ABM devices in terms of setting it up. And really, all I had to do was modify a setup guide we had setup guides for sort of each use case, and just a really slight modification to the second guide basically covered everything. So the process was largely the same for both. So it was made it really easy that way.
Okay, awesome. So, with all these technical details, obviously there's a lot going on, right? And so there's bound to be some challenges. Jim, just to kind of pull a little bit more on the technical piece, what do you think are some of the biggest technical challenges that the admin faces when migrating from one MDM or device management solution to another?
Yeah, I honestly think that the biggest challenge is how you're going to migrate and looking at all of the different moving parts that come into that. Things like, are your users administrators so that they can approve the actual MDM installation? Is the profile that's there currently even removable by the end user or by anyone, or does it have to be done via the MDM? Are devices always online, or are we in a situation where we have a lot of laptops, work from home situations now where the device might be closed for a certain amount of time? So is it going to receive those commands? Am I going to have to physically touch all of these devices in order to get them migrated? So those are probably the biggest challenges that I've faced in the past myself migrating.
Yeah, and maybe a detail just for our viewers. Is there any way to do the migration, 100% silently for the user?
There is not today. There used to be on older versions of Mac OS, but since 10.13, Apple has implemented something where the end user has to approve MDM installation if it's not going through automated device enrollment during Setup Assistant. And even now with Big Sur and Monterey, the ability to even install a profile in the background, like using terminal commands or things like that, has been completely removed. So there's always going to be some interaction from the end user when you're migrating a device that's already been set up.
Got it. So speaking of users, Eric, let's talk about our users a bit. Like, they're the ones who are typically affected, I feel like, when migrating to a new solution, maybe even more than the admin. Could you kind of talk about what the experience is like for the user?
Yeah, absolutely. So, generally speaking, moving over to a new MDM is, for the end user at least, is generally speaking a pretty quick process, but it's not always without issues. There's always that fear that, something might go wrong with, device policies or settings and things like that. So, a user might experience an issue with an application, or maybe there's a setting that's changed because of, the policies that we as the IT admins have built out. Maybe there's, password policies come into play, things of that nature. So there's always kind of that fear when you switch to a new MDM, and inevitably things are going to go wrong. You're going to encounter issues. So, as IT admins, we always have to try our best to be available to help folks through that, to provide a great user experience. So, yeah, but generally speaking, the actual process of getting set up with the new MDM is usually pretty quick. So,
okay. I just want to dig into that a little bit more. For you and your experience for your users, did you do the migration for them? Did they do it? Did you give them instructions? Kind of what did that user interaction look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So initially we were thinking, well, maybe we could leverage the migration agent and we could maybe add it via a script through our old MDM so that we could add it to the workstations and sort of automate things a little bit. But we sort of realized that we wanted to allow folks to install Kanji at their own pace at a time that was convenient for them, especially being in a remote first working environment where everybody's on their own schedule and we've got folks all over the world. So we basically, what we did is we ran a quick test rollout with about 10 employees just to make sure we covered all our bases and our technical documentation was there. And then what we did is we basically announced it at a meeting and said, hey, we're looking to install Kanji. It starts on this date, and we really hope that you can have it installed by this date. We sent out video guides for basically every use case. If you had a computer that maybe wasn't on an MDM and wanted to enroll, if you had an ABM device, if you had a non-ABM device, and then we had full technical documentation to accompany those videos as well. So yeah, that was the user experience for us. We basically got everything sorted out on over 300 workstations in less than 2 weeks, which I thought was quite impressive and was a pretty smooth rollout.
Awesome. So it was really that, that once again, that communication to the user, letting them know exactly what was going to happen. It sounds like was probably one of the most key pieces to that. And then obviously thinking through all the different technical things that they might face and accounting for those.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And in terms of one thing that you mentioned that I thought was really interesting was letting the user do it at their own pace. Like, did you guys talk about like, oh, we're just, hey, let's push this all down and let's get it done? Or, kind of what brought you to that kind of conclusion?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we started off with, let's push this forward and let's get it all done at once. But, we didn't want to interrupt people's meetings. We didn't want to have to, change people's schedules, things of that nature. So really what we decided to do is, give our folks more freedom to set it up whenever it's convenient for them. And thankfully, just the way that the migration agent is built, that made it really easy for us. To our users, we said, this is only going to take between 5 and 15 minutes to set up. So if you've got time today, set it up today. That's great. If you need to get it done tomorrow, that works too. And then we sort of we set a deadline of let's get it all done by this date. And generally speaking, most folks are going to follow that deadline. And then from there, you just follow up with anybody who hasn't quite moved over yet. But having the migration agent and being able to say like this is going to be pretty much fully automated. There's not a lot that you have to do, and it's only going to take a couple minutes to set up is really key. And I think a lot of our employees really appreciated that with this MDM rollout.
That's great. And did you find that you had to do a lot of hand-holding? Like if you had to throw a percentage of like how many users did it just all by themselves, they rolled with the instructions versus the ones that, you had to give that extra assistance. What did that kind of breakdown look like?
Probably about an 80-20 split if I had to guess. I will say that I was really, really impressed. We had automated alerts set up linked through to Slack. And so I think about 100 employees installed Kanji on day one, which was really cool. So it was great. It was great to see, almost a third of our entire company get on board and set it up right away. And then, in the days following, I'd say in probably the first 3 to 5 days, we had 75% or more of our workstations moved over to Kanji. So it was very quick, very streamlined. And then we just followed up with folks sort of one-on-one once we got past got closer to our deadlines or past our deadlines, and then helped out where needed. But generally there weren't a lot of technical questions about things. The feedback that we got during our test rollout was super easy to use. The technical documentation that we had created was great. And yeah, really not a lot of questions from folks.
Awesome. And Jim, with all the different migrations that you did, was this pretty typical, like having it be user driven? Did you find in some cases that IT did it? Like, how did that breakdown look for you?
Definitely, it's all over the spectrum, honestly. Just because when I first started doing it, it was definitely more involved. There was a lot more hand holding. There were definitely some times when I did the whole thing myself. Sat in a room for 3 days with everyone gathering up everyone's computers, and there was probably a lot more desktops in that day, and it was a lot easier when everyone was in a single office or a couple of offices where you just had to visit and go through and just hit every computer. So that was definitely the more involved processes. Definitely, as I got more comfortable with doing it a number of times, definitely tried to figure out ways to automate a lot of that process, which then Apple took away when we had to actually install it and click OK or run terminal commands to do that automated device enrollment. But it was a process that, like Eric said, if you plan it out and you know what's coming down the line, you know what's going to change when you remove the existing MDM, you know what you're pushing out with the new MDM, it makes it a lot more smooth and a lot simpler. And afterwards, it was very easy to provide, the users that information to say, here's what's expected of you, and let them take care of that, and then let the MDMs do what they need to do. Definitely, since I've been with Kanji, the migration agent that Eric has referenced makes it tremendously easier on the end user and the admin by automating what tasks can be automated, and then continuously making sure that the user is kind of given a little nudge when needed to say, hey, this is required. These things are required of you. Let's go ahead and get that taken care of, because that's probably the biggest thing, right? Is you have to make it easy for the end user. They don't have an incentive to migrate from one MDM to another. It's usually at the request of the admin to say, this is hopefully going to make my life easier. There might be some pieces that help them out with a new MDM, new features or new abilities that come along with that the end user can take advantage of. But you want to make it as easy as possible for them and as little work, because you don't want to lose productivity. You don't want them to have to take an hour or a half hour out of their day to do the migration. You want it to be a couple of minutes.
Yeah. And so would it be safe to say, I'm just thinking, you mentioned kind of this progression that you've seen. Is it safe to say that, it may have been something that you used to see IT doing a lot more for the user to do that migration, but then, and maybe even there was a time where you could really automate a lot as IT, but it's kind of shifted more to a user-driven process now, or kind of, is that a safe assumption?
Yeah, I'd say that's a very safe assumption, just because there has to be that user involvement now. So IT can't really do it for them. They might need to be involved at some stage, but we try to make it as easy as possible for them so that they don't have to necessarily have to jump through a bunch of hoops, right? We don't want to have to say, okay, I need you to go and do these 10 different tasks. We want to say you need to do about 3 different things, and hopefully that's all that they have to do.
Yeah, definitely. And if the user is left in charge of that, and it may be nudged by IT, what would make them want to migrate? Like, I'm just thinking as a user, I may think to myself like, oh, I don't want to go through that work. Like, I'm getting my job done just as is. Why should I enroll into this other system? Or why should I enroll in the first place? Or why should I have a device that's managed? Big Brother's watching, right? Like, how do you encourage the user to actually migrate?
Like I said, make it easy. Make it something that is not hard at all, that they can do on their own time, and that it's going to be easy, and give them that incentive that this is not anything that takes any time from you. It's just something that we need to do. I ask Eric how what his experience was to getting his users to migrate.
Well, Eric, what was your experience?
So, yeah. I mean, there's sort of the features and the benefits, and selling those. That's one thing that I think we did a great job of. My team was really making sure that everybody was aware of what the new MDM, of what Kanji was, and what it could do for us, and how it was going to help us. We had a lot of people really excited about it, and everyone was on board before the process, so that helped. But if you get to the point where you're following up with folks and they're not really getting back to you, that's when you sort of have to bring in we need this for security and audit purposes. And then that sort of changes, that sort of changes things for folks, and they go, oh, we really do need to get this set up right now because it is imperative for these reasons. So, I find that's always a really good one to bring up if folks sort of aren't getting back to you in a timely manner, is to just remind them that, it is something that we need to have for these reasons. And then usually folks will go, oh, I'm so sorry. And then they'll get switched over to it right away. So I find that helps from time to time.
Yeah, and Eric, is there any way, like, did you guys like do anything to also, I'll say, like, entice your users? Did they get anything as part of enrolling? I know sometimes we used to call that a carrot, right? Like, what's the carrot you're giving them? The stick is like the forcing function, right? But the carrot is, hey, here's this cool thing you get if you enroll.
Yeah, so I don't know necessarily what the carrot was. We really tried to showcase how versatile self-service could be. I know Kanji has a lot of auto apps and a lot of apps in the library. But one thing that my team did is we sort of polled all of the various teams across the organization and said, if new folks are joining your team tomorrow, what tools would they need? And then we started adding in custom apps for all of those. So that was one of the things that was really helpful. And then the other one was, hey, if you ever need to upgrade your computer, we're going to be able to automate a lot of that for you, and it's going to streamline things for you. So people were just excited about that, and they wanted to see new people joining their team succeed and be set up for day one. So that got a lot of people really excited. Also, we did show the Kanji. There's a great video that Kanji has on the YouTube channel. We showed that at a sort of an all hands meeting, and that sort of got everyone fired up about Kanji. So it was probably the most excitement for MDM I've ever seen. We were excited about it, as IT folks, but everybody else was on board right away. So that made it a lot easier.
I love it. That's how I explain to my family what I do. So yeah, that video has paid dividends so many times. So no, that's great.
Yeah.
So that's an excellent idea. Essentially using self-service to kind of entice your users of like, hey, you get to get these apps, and hey, if you're a user that loves the latest and greatest OS, this can help you out. I think those are excellent incentives. So now I want to kind of shift to keys to success. We've talked about kind of what is involved in migration, some of the technical aspects, why it's complicated. And now I want to kind of spend some time on really kind of mitigating those challenges. So Eric, what could an admin do ahead of time to really mitigate those challenges that we talked about?
Yeah, so my sort of philosophy with it is test everything and then test everything again. So there's so many variables when you're working with a system migration, and you have to make sure that you've accounted for all of them and you've tested for all of them. So my team, I had my team basically test on different workstations, different Macs, older operating systems, newer operating systems, ABM enrolled devices, non-ABM. What happens when we set up a device that already has file vault disk encryption enabled? What happens if we do the same with one that isn't enabled? How do auto apps work? How do these different things sort of behave together? So all told, we probably tested it, I want to say 15, 20 plus times, just wiping workstations and trying it again. And let's try this and let's try that. There wasn't very many things that we encountered or problems or issues, but we wanted to make sure we were prepared in case we ran into those in the future. So really it was just all about testing and making sure that we knew the MDM, as best as possible and could anticipate any questions that we might have.
Awesome. And you already kind of touched on this a little bit in terms of the planning. So really a big part of that is the testing component. Was there any other planning that you had to do to kind of ensure that successful migration?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I've touched on some of these so far, but I think timelines was a big one for us, and making sure that we knew when we were announcing things, what we were announcing, when our deadlines were going to be, what our timeframes sort of looked like for that. And then I also had a checklist that we sort of went through, asking questions like, is our documentation easy to understand? Are our video guides clear? Are they concise? Do they make sense? Where do users report problems? If there's an issue, generally speaking, we want to see tickets, but that can get a little overwhelming if you have, 100 people asking you just really quick, easy questions. So we wanted to make sure we had a space available. We used the Slack channel for the rollout to make sure that if someone had a really quick question for us, we could just answer it right then and there. Do we have a tracking tool in place? How do we know which workstations have been swapped over and which ones haven't yet? Do we have alerts set up? So like I said earlier, we did employ the integration with Slack to have an alerts channel so that we could see in real time who was getting set up with it, and we could anticipate if there was going to be any issues. And then, how do employees report feedback, things like that. So Really, we had sort of that checklist of things that we had to go through and to make sure that we had all of our bases covered.
Great. And you mentioned time. Jim, do you think, is there a right time to migrate? Like, I think that's a common question. Like, when should we do it?
Yeah, I think the right time is when you're ready, and like Eric said, there's a lot of planning that goes into performing a successful migration, but that can be done anytime, really. You as long as you plan for it and you know what's coming, your users know what's coming, you've provided them with the documentation they need, they have all of the information they need, it can be a smooth process. So there doesn't need to be a specific time to migrate. It's whenever you're ready to pull the trigger, whenever you've decided that this is what we need now, you can make it happen. It's something that can be prepared for, it's something that can be taken on, and not anything that needs to be the fear of performing a successful migration isn't something that needs to keep you from actually migrating and getting onto a new platform.
Yeah, and it is, in terms of where, they're currently in one device management solution and then they're migrating to another, should they start that in terms of that kind of, do they wait to the end? Do they like, this is the last day of my contract? Should they have some overlap there? What does that look like?
I definitely always recommended having about a month of overlap, just so you could keep, on track, make sure you know this is what's going to happen. If we need to, we can take a little bit of extra time to make sure things are going correctly. That testing phase is critical, like Eric said. And it sounds like they did it exactly the way that they needed to. Test the heck out of it and make sure that you know exactly what's going to happen. But yeah, I in my career, I'd always recommended about a 1 month overlap to make sure that you have time to get devices out of the old MDM and into the new one successfully.
Yeah, I'd assume that might grow proportionally. If you have, 10,000 devices, you might want to give it maybe even a little bit more time.
You might. We've definitely migrated a few thousand devices in a very short amount of time. Like Eric said, it's the testing. It really is the biggest phase, especially with the tools we have at Kanji. We can migrate devices very, very quickly once you're ready to actually pull the trigger.
Got it. Awesome. And speaking of migration at Kanji, I feel like we think of migration here a little bit more holistically. And Jim, could you tell us just kind of how Kanji helps our customers with their migration process?
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that my team is dedicated to, or at least it's one of the biggest parts of what we do. Is we're part of the onboarding conversation with the clients, and we dedicate a chunk of that to migration. Every client that onboards with Kanji gets a solutions architect that will be dedicated to their migration specifically. So that's a resource for them to reach out to if they have questions. They're technicians who have been through migrations before, so it's not something that's new to them. They are ready for the sharp edges that come from different MDMs. We hire from a broad range of candidates that have MDM experience in a number of different platforms so that they can be prepared for what might come down the line. We try to work very closely with our clients and make sure that they have all the tools that they need. One of those being the migration agent itself that Eric talked about. The other is the solutions architect that is there to answer the questions and has that knowledge to back that up.
So there's a technical component, but then there's also the people component.
Yes, exactly.
Awesome. And Eric, I guess you already touched on this a little bit, and I didn't even ask you to, but now I am. Could you tell us a little bit about what it was like when you did migrate to Kanji, and what did that process look like? Did somebody guide you, and kind of talk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to say Kanji was probably the easiest MDM migration that I've ever done, which was great, and we were super impressed by how quickly and easily we could get all of our workstations moved over. We did have a pre-planning session with the Kanji team to sort of better understand. The migration agent was new to me. I didn't know how that worked initially. We had discussions about how that would work and what that would look like, and how that would sort of work with a bunch of different variables. And honestly, that the migration agent tool alone and having that conversation was just a game changer. I felt way more confident knowing that we had these resources available to us to make sure that the MDM rollout was really smooth. I also touched on this earlier, but the automated alerts that we set up through Slack really helped us just to monitor this in real time. It was so easy just to keep track of how things were going and if we were encountering any issues. And we didn't really encounter many problems along the way. And because we did all of that sort of pre-planning work and a lot of that testing, we knew what we were expecting, and we were able to make changes on the fly if we ever needed to. And then I also just give a quick kudos to the Kanji support team. My team had some questions about some features and things like that, and they're really quick and responsive for us. So it was great to be able to just ask that quick question. Great, we've got an answer. Now we can make a new blueprint, or we can adjust something, and so that made things really easy for us.
Awesome, that's great to hear. And just to start to bring things to a close, Eric, if when you think about migration, could you just share with our viewers what are those keys to a successful migration, if you had to kind of sum it up?
Sure. So I'll boil it down to sort of like three key areas. So number one is planning. We've talked about that a lot in this panel already. Is make sure you've tested and planned for everything. Communication, making sure that your users have a clear understanding of the process, how it works, why it works that way, when it's taking place, and sort of what they can expect. One thing I'll say is that the video guides that we created and the knowledge base articles that we built, I think were tremendously helpful for our end users to really get a visual of what it was going to look like. And then finally, support. Have your team on standby and have them have your team on standby and ready to help troubleshoot, to answer questions, to fix issues on the fly. Sort of for us, the migration week, we were all available and just ready, just keeping an eye on things to make sure that everything was going smoothly, and it did. But being able to be there to support is super, super helpful. So yeah, those are the three things that I think you really need for successful migration, and it'll go super smoothly for you.
Jim, very similarly, what would you tell someone embarking on a migration for the first time?
Definitely kind of what Eric said a lot, which is planning is the biggest part. What you've got to know what's coming down the line, what's going to happen, and test the heck out of it. But don't let a process that seems really complex to start with be the reason that you don't move to a tool that might be a better solution for you. With the right planning and knowledge and the right people behind you to provide that knowledge, you can make a process that seems really complex a lot simpler.
Awesome. Thank you both. I think we learned a lot from you today. We learned the importance of planning, communicating, and supporting your users. I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. I hope you found this event to be enlightening and that you gained some valuable insight. I want to especially thank Eric and Jim, our panelists. If you are interested in trying Kanji, I invite you to go to kanji.io/start to get started. And I encourage you to ask our team how it can help you with your device management migration. Thank you all, and we will see you next time.